Check, 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 check. Check, 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 check. So for those of you on the live stream, there's the continued roof construction on High Tech 1. So you'll be hearing what appears to be this morning a whole variety of construction sounds on the live stream. And that's where we're just at here, I guess. Good news is the building is not filling with noxious fumes at this point, so we can continue class. Cool. All right, let's look at a few other things here. We did a bunch of particle work. We did a bunch of particle work. It's usually pretty good. Like, we don't usually have to deal with this one very often. Like, I don't know. They're redoing the roof of the building. This is a really big building, so they've been doing it for over a month at this point. I guess it takes a while. I have no idea what that takes. Anyway, I'll just try and yell over the noise. Let's do one other thing here. We'll take a break from particles. Now look at particles with particles with the what am I looking for? Unity event system. First, we're going to look at moving platform, and you may have noticed in the example that you needed to start your Unity project with, that there was that platform just kind of randomly moving around that I used to sort of test out the moving platform. And part of that, the system here is mostly behind the scenes. And so if you do have a moving platform, there's not too much you need to do. One is that I would move the moving platform with the animator. So not using scripts to use it to move it right now, but rather using the animator. This is for any sort of moving platform where the player needs to be able to stand on it, okay? So you want to move that with the animator. Then there's two main things. There's a script which is already on the player prefab that's in the template. Although if you drag in a new player prefab, it wouldn't be on there. It is the moving platform script, and that goes on the player. And then the only other part of the system is that any moving platform needs to be tagged with moving, I think it's capital M. Whatever the tag is that is already in there, moving platform. That's what the system is looking for, and it needs to be that. So those are the main things that need to happen there. Let's look at that real quick. So on the player here, under player armature, at the very top level, right, here's the script stack that needs to be on the very top. And again, if you drag up a new player armature from starter assets, third-person controller, prefabs, and player armature, if I were to put a new one in here, you would see that it is updated. Great, I wasn't sure if that was the case. Here at the bottom, right? So this is the new thing that's that I added to the system to make this work. And that script is in the script folder right there. There's no parameters on the script. It's all behind the scenes stuff to make this work. Here is the moving platform. There it is. And this is labeled, or not labeled, tagged moving platform. And this tag should already exist in the system there. And so anything that you want to make that has a moving platform needs to have that tag. And so let's look at this. This allows us to stand on said platform. Let's move this out of the way. Let's see if I can jump onto this platform. There we go. And I stick to the platform while it is moving and rotating, which was no small feat. There's a bunch of complex series of things that need to happen here to make sure that this works, and we can walk around on the moving platform and jump off of it, which is great. Without this being tagged, you'll see what the default behavior would be. The player would just not stick to it. Which is a little counterintuitive. You think it would be the behavior of the physics system, but yeah, if you miss either part of that, this is what happens. It just slips off as if there's like no friction, although this really isn't physics engine stuff, it's separate from that. So both of those things need to be in place. The one that's automatically in place is the script on the player, on the player armature right here. Again, no parameters for that. It just needs to be, on the top level here that has the third-person controller and the character controller, right? Not somewhere else below that in the hierarchy, right? You can add things below here that you want to move along with the character, right? This is where we added the dust trail on Monday when we were doing that. And you could add other things here below this, say, for instance, mostly particle things. Other stuff that you want to move with the character. Yeah, mostly, maybe there's an icon that appears over their head or something like that. That would be something that would happen here. But now if I take this and switch it back to moving platform, everything will work once again. Cool. That's good. Let's look real quick, because one other part of this is the camera. really hope someone doesn't come crashing through the ceiling of the room here. Sounds like there's an outside chance of that happening. That's what it would be.
That's what I like to imagine. Not like fully through.
Yeah, yeah. In addition, the script is keeping the player stuck to the platform. However, the other part of this is the camera settings. Okay, so remember this whole system, camera system, uses the Unity camera package called Cinemachine. I think we installed that ourselves earlier in the semester, and it's already installed in the template I gave you guys. And Cinemachine is built on the idea of virtual cameras that kind of control the main camera. And so this main camera here, we're pretty much not touching. It needs to stay there. It has this little icon, which means that Cinemachine is active, and the only thing that you need to know about the main camera is it has this Cinemachine brain on it, so that this is where all the Cinemachine calculations happen. But then the actual camera object that we care about that's following our player is the one that says player follow camera, and I'm gonna group these things up here at the top for right now so they go together like so. The player follow camera, I believe I did make some changes to this, and let's look at what they are. The camera has two transforms that you need to populate here, and one is the follow and the other is the look at. Follow essentially is the thing, what other game object does the camera need to track with, or just essentially move with. And then look at is going to be the one that controls rotation, right? So both of those things are independent. Move along with the player, but then it's one thing to move. There's a separation between the moving and then also the rotating to actually look at the character. And both of those, notice that they're not looking at the character itself, they're looking at the player camera root, which if we look at our player stack up here, player camera root is a separate, I believe totally blank game object that's below or a child of the player armature. And so you can see by moving the player camera root, you can adjust what the player camera is doing there, what it's looking at. So that's one way to adjust what's going on with the camera view. The second parts here, if we look at this, there's different algorithms here for what is the camera doing in relationship to these two game objects. And the one that's working the best for me is this third person follow here. And that, you see there's other options. We don't need to get into all of them right now, but mine is set to third person follow. If yours is not set to third person follow, that would be a good one. And then under aim, I have hard look at. The damping here is whether there's any, how would I explain this? With the damping at 0, the camera is 100% locked to the player game object. And so as I move around in the game over here, as I move left and right, the camera immediately changes as I change. If I were to add some damping to the camera over here under the movement, let's say something obvious. I can probably do this in play mode so we can see the difference. There we go. Yeah. Let me escape out. I'll put it at something more dramatic, like 5, 5, 5, and come back over here. Now, you see that the player can run away from the camera to some extent. And then when I stop, the camera zooms back in. So before, it's as if the camera was attached with like an invisible metal pole with no give. And so as soon as the player moved, the camera would move. Now, it's as if the camera is attached with a spring. And that spring, the amount of give in the spring is the damping number. So a bigger number there is going to give you more give in the spring. So the player can run away from the camera, or the player can actually, get closer to the camera, even to the point where it's kind of out of view. And then it slowly comes back to the default view. If I were to bring this down a little bit to, let's say 2, 2, 2, and come back here and play, we can see a little bit of that same effect. But the return to the player position is a little bit faster because the spring is a little bit stiffer because we're at 2, 2, 2. So make a decision there for yourself about your game. Maybe a little bit of damping is here. That'll make it seem more like your game. You have to balance this with a few things. How fast does the player move? And so if there's more damping and your player's moving very quickly, there's more of a chance that the player can move out of the view of the camera. So, having the player move out of the view of the camera for a long period of time is clearly maybe not great for the gameplay, depending on how your game is laid out. However, the more damping does give it more of a cinematic feel, where there's a separation between, even if the player doesn't explicitly realize this, there's more of a separation between the player and the camera filming that player, which would give it more of this idea that the game is being quote unquote filmed rather than the camera locked to the player, which for something that's very, very, very fast is probably necessary, but also maybe gives it more of a quote unquote older video game feel where this, this idea of having this cinematic camera that has damping, this is not news to all of you guys. Over the past, even people younger than me, you've seen video games get more and more cinematic over the course of your life. I've seen video games get, go from completely acinematic to totally cinematic over the course of the last 30 years. And so this is, one of the influences of movies and movie camera movement on video games, right? As video games get closer and closer to, if not having already achieved, the idea of the quote-unquote playable movie, where we're, all the visual language is very, very, very informed by film and cinema, and but not every game embraces that language. So this is a decision you need to make as the designer, the developer. The other ones here that are important are our shoulder offset. And so there's the Y value, which is going to be up and down in Unity. So how, quote unquote, eye level do you want the camera to be, right? So if you move it down like this, so that we're more with the camera at the level of the player, then you may want to make an adjustment with the camera root so that we don't end up with the camera I don't know why the player camera root has a weird rotation to it right now. I'm going to go back to global, there we go, and move that down. Right, so that gives us a little bit more of this camera at the level of the player view, whereas previously it was more above. To go back and look at the above version, I could take the Y and move it up a little bit, and then the Z is kind of going to be our distance. There's two things to manage here. The distance, how far away from the character do we want to be? It depends on how much of the game you want the player to be able to see while playing here. Clearly, when we're further away, there's a greater chance that things will get in between us and the player. There's a couple different ways to compensate for that. One would be the height of the rig. If you do get further away and further up, like so, here we're sort of more in almost a sort of isometric third-person view. But in terms of distance from the player, there's the Z, which is the moving the camera. And then separately from that, there is the focal length. So here under lens, the focal length for the camera, for those of you who have taken 240, is measured in millimeters, where a wide angle lens is going to mean that we see more, but we also we get more view and distortion. Whereas a telephoto, which is going to be a higher millimeter, we would see less, and there would be less distortion. In Unity, they're not using focal length, they're using the inverse, which is the field of view. Right, so there's two different ways to do this. In some there's two different ways to measure the same thing, either in focal length millimeters or field of view numbers, right? These numbers here are what 40 what degrees-ish. I'm not exactly sure. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, you can see that this is similar. You're right. You can kind of look at it and be like, wait, isn't this the same thing as moving the Z? And it's important for you to realize, as someone who makes visual images, that no, it is not the same thing. Okay, that's really key to keep in mind, is that changing the field of view is changing the camera focal length, and you're changing the amount of distortion in the image, right? Especially if you were to dial it way down like this. Okay, so you can see it happening a little bit right here in the building view, right, where all of a sudden this building, which is a square, right? This is if I were to model this wall, I'm not modeling a trapezoidal shape. I'm modeling a square shape, right? But the view through the camera, because I've cranked up the field of view so high, now this over here is starting to look like the end on this side is bigger than the end on this side. This is the type of distortion that's caused by wide angle lens. And if I were to, right, this is clearly too far away. Like, we can't play the game with it being this far away. I'm going to turn off this fog for a second. Okay. And if I wanted to have this wide of a field of view, I would compensate by coming into the camera and changing the rig Z offset to get closer to the character again. But now we see that things are different. This is the wide angle lens distortion. I've exaggerated it here a bunch so that you can clearly see it. And everything towards the edges of the frame, you know, in the very center here, things are relatively undistorted, and the amount of distortion increases as you go out towards the edges of the image here. And some games have more or less of this depending on how much they need for you to see here. But yeah, you can see clearly as I move this around, everything gets some level of distortion. Even the player. Right now, it seems like when the player's walking towards the camera, we get some very strange proportions on the character itself, right? The head all of a sudden seems much larger. This is wide angle lens distortion. The field of view here, if I bring it back to something typical, I believe with the numbers they're using here, the regular human eye would be somewhere around 50. And now not the damping number, the Z offset number. I put these back to some sort of reasonable amount. Now I get less distortion happening. So it's a balance between these two values. A lot of the things at this level of tuning the game, we have the adjustments we need. You just need to know which ones are give and take. We talked about this with the jump, right? There's the jump animation speed versus the jump height in the third-person controller. There's the character movement speed versus the animation speed of the run cycle. Another one of these balancing parameters here is the shoulder offset, being the camera distance from the player, and balancing that with the amount of field of view that you want to see in the game. So both of these things are important and part of your decision making, right? So really think about this. I would encourage you always to just not blindly accept the defaults. I mean, at least I'm on camera right now, so if I get crushed by something coming through the ceiling, for insurance purposes, we'll have a lot of documentation of it. The other one here to take a look at, I have this set to hard look at. This is how we rotate the camera here. A couple other things to look at here. Depending on your game, things that may be interesting. One is that, cinematic language. Cinematic language in the game. There's a couple things that I think are useful here. One is that we can add noise. That's what that last one is, noise to the camera. This gives it more of a handheld. Whereas if the camera is being held by a person, not perfect all the time. And at the bottom, that's what we have here. Noise, if I were to unfold, I turn up the amplitude of the noise or the frequency. So this is, now the camera is moving around a little bit by itself. Again, this really increases the idea that the game is being filmed, right, by something. The amplitude would be how much the camera moves. The frequency would be how fast it moves. Right, so something like this is not probably a great idea for the entire game, but maybe for different sections, in which case we need to talk about that for a second, and let's look at that. So I'll put this back to 1 and 1, so it's pretty minimal, maybe even less. Okay, so I think that's all of the main parameters here. Yeah, let's do camera cutscenes first. So, for instance, I'm going to come out of this. How do we switch between cameras? Cinemachine makes this very easy, which is one of the reasons that we use it. So if I came up here to plus, that's opening up on the other window. Let's hear plus. How is that still on the other window? There we go. So under Cinemachine here, I'm going to grab just another Cinemachine camera. And down here, I'll call this, there we go. We'll just call this cutscene, or I'll call it camera cutscene. There we go. And actually, let's do this out of play mode. So let's grab new camera cutscene. And I'm going to position this camera. Where's my player? Right there. And so let's say over here. And I'll rotate this. The camera frustum, which is the view here, maybe a little tough to see on the live stream there, but right here, when we see that box trapezoid pyramid coming out from the camera, this is the frustum, just the name for that visualization. And we've got that, that, and so if I were to turn this back on, so what did I just do there? This is the player follow camera. And I just clicked over here in the editor to disable it. If I turn it back on, it goes back over to the character. And yeah, this is how Cinemachine works, is that you can switch between cameras by disabling the camera object. And you saw what happened. It didn't just flip to the new one. It actually animated over there, right? Which is really great. I wish there were more systems like this, where now, in order to go over to something new, we can do that just by turning something on and off. This free animation is super cool, but where's it coming from? The animation is controlled by the Cinemachine brain, which is essentially managing the whole system and animating between the cameras when they're turned on and off. And as we know, turning objects on and off is pretty easy using Unity events, like we've been using for all of the other stuff all around the game for controlling game logic. So let's do that. How it's one way that we could handle this. So let's say I walked over into this room and then I wanted to use this camera view while I was in this zone. Let's make that happen with this, which we can just turn these on and off. Actually, let me just finish what I was saying about the animation. if I come back to the Cinemachine brain, right, which is in the main camera here, the animation controls are right here under the blend. Okay, so this is what happens when you change between one camera and another. The default is it's going to ease in and ease out for 2 seconds. And so if I wanted these transitions to take longer, I put it at 5 over there. Then if I turned the player follow camera off, we'll get a slower transition to over there. If I wanted the transition to happen quicker, let's say just 1 second. Now if I turn the player camera off, player follow camera, very quickly changes. And there's also some options under the ease in and ease out, depending on what sort of artistic decision you would want to make here. So ease in and ease out is going to move it and start slow and end slow. The only other useful one here, I think, is cut, right? Besides this, I wouldn't select linear. If you've taken any of my other classes, I always tell everyone stop using linear keyframes to animate the camera because it always looks really clunky at the beginning and the end. But under cut, it just, you notice that the timing goes away because we'll just switch from one camera to the next. So if I take the player camera and turn it off, boom, now I'm automatically looking through that camera, one frame to the next frame. So those are the two, I think, usable artistic decisions to make there, whether you wanted to animate from one position to the next or not. Let's leave it at ease in and ease out for 2 seconds right now, and then we'll go from there. Okay, so let's set this up. This is the camera here. I'll call this room cam. There we go. And we want to switch to the room cam when we come over here and walk into this room. And so we essentially need to set up a collider here. And this collider is going to need to let us know when the player enters this zone. And then when that happens, we'll send a Unity event to turn off the player follow camera. And then the Cinemachine will handle changing to this camera. And then we'll need a separate Unity event that happens when we exit to turn this one back on. And so let's grab those and make that happen. So that's part of the reason both of these are right here. On trigger enter event tag 3D, on trigger exit event tag 3D, right? So this is going to turn the player follow camera on, off rather, and then back on when we leave. So we need both of those. There's one. Here's another one. this one came over because of the downloads with the 1. Remember, every time you have this, you've got to get rid of that space, parentheses, 1, parentheses. There we go. Okay, so those are both working now, or let's let it compile. There it goes. Okay, let's set this up. I'm going to create a new blank game object that keeps showing up over there. So create empty, and this will be the room collider. And I'm going to put a box collider on this. And yeah, it doesn't need to have any visual stuff for it right now. This is going to be sort of an invisible trigger. Let's look at it straight from the top. Click again to go to orthographic view. There we go. And then click again over here to see it from this view. There we go. Now we know we're in the right space. Let's scale it up. So I'm not going to scale here. I'm going to scale here under the size of the box collider. So 5, 5, 5. Okay, that works. Now we want our scripts here. So I would put the enter first and the exit second, and then go from there. All right, so remember, we want this to only happen when the player does stuff. And so by default, the player armature should be tagged player, which is good. And if not, that's what you need the tag to say. And so that's the default I have for the scripts. You know, in the off case that you're using this when something else triggers it, this is where you would change the tag that actually causes the events to be sent, so that it's not going to send an event when some other random object happens to enter the trigger. Let's go ahead and, so when we enter, we want to turn this camera off. We should be able to do that fairly easily. So player camera, follow camera, game object, set active off. And then when we leave, exit, we want to do the opposite. Take player follow camera and game object on, which will then override the room camera and go back to our regular following. Let's see, did we forget anything? Oh yeah, we forgot one thing. The collider needs to be a trigger. So make sure that that is checked so that it's, you know, a trigger box, and not, without that, it's going to be an invisible wall that we just can't walk into. It's going to be part of the physics system. And this, I wish this were bigger in the interface, because this is by far the most important thing in the system. Let's go. Let's try it. I think we got everything. I'm going to save and come in here. And come over this way. Cool. Now I'm in the room. The camera stays there. When I leave the room, picks up. Awesome. Very, very nice. So that worked well. Let's expand it a little bit, because it that works fine when we only have one cutscene camera. If we had multiple cutscene cameras, we'd have to be more specific about this. So let's do that. We'll make another random camera here. Well, we'll just be more specific here first. In addition to turning this one off, we can control the system much better by, this one was just on the whole time, and so it automatically got turned on. We want to probably explicitly turn this one on when we turn this one off. That way, if we had multiple cameras, they wouldn't conflict. So if we come back to our room collider here and expand our event list, let's do that. So we'll take this camera here and we'll turn this one on. And we will turn it off. Right, so essentially, the inverse in this instance. You would not want them both checked in both instances. Let's make sure that that still is cool. I don't think the order here, I think the order is okay. Let's check. That's good. And now when we leave, there we go. The room camera has turned off. And so if we want to duplicate this system, now that we have multiple cameras, let's see. We've got a whole system here, right? There's this thing, which is essentially managing the camera. Because this is turning this on and off, it's not a good idea to make the collider a child of the camera, because that would mean the system turning the thing on and off would be hidden underneath the on and off switch. So logically, that's clearly a problem, right? It's like as if like the thing that turned the light switch off and turned off the light switch's existence was the light switch. And if you turned off the light switch and then it wasn't there, you would be unable to turn the light switch back on, right? So keep that in mind. But we could take both of these and make them a, let's get out of play mode. Group them together and create empty parent. There we go. And this could be cutscene manager, might be a good name. Okay, here. So we've got this system here. Let's duplicate it to make it work somewhere else. I'm going to Shift D. Control C, Control V. There we go. All right. So I've got a second one here, and we'll put one on this room here. Okay, so we've got one here and one here now. Let's check cutscene manager 1. Okay, so it's got a camera here and room camera 1 and room collider. Oops. One. And yeah, Unity is actually pretty good at this. When you shift, or when you duplicate something with Control C, Control V, it's been my experience that it seems pretty good at updating the stuff in the events so that the duplicated thing shows up in the event rather than the original thing, which is what you would want in this case. And so that all looks good. So now there's a camera here that would turn on when we entered this room. And there's a camera over here that would turn on when we entered this room. I think everything else is good. Let's give it a shot. Nope, that went to the wrong camera. Why did I go to the wrong camera? Was I clicking on the wrong thing? Here's the collider. Room camera 1. I just gave Unity all that credit. Let's update this stuff. Here's room camera. I'm going to drag this in here just to reestablish these connections. Let's try it again. Let's look and see what happens here. Oh, I know what's going on. We're managing this better by turning these on when we go into the room, right? With the script. And so we want their start, we want them to be disabled at the start of the game. And so both of these will turn off. There we go. So now you really only want one Cinemachine camera enabled at the beginning, and that's the player follow camera, unless you're going to start with some other cutscene camera. And so now both of these are off. This should be correct. And so now if I walk into here, there we go. I'm in this camera room. I'm able to walk around, do things in this camera. And now if I walk out, camera picks back up. And I walk into this room. And now the camera is locked right there. And if I walk out of this room, camera picks back up. Wonderful. That works great. So now we've got something that we can easily duplicate and work with well, and we just need to make sure that this is off at the beginning, and we can make as many of these as we want now, as long as we manage it in this way, that we only have one camera active at a time. Otherwise, you can't have more than one camera active at a time in Cinemachine, but it's going to default, I think, to the one on the top of the stack. It just becomes tough to manage at that point, forecasting where things are going to be. And so when you go into a cutscene, turn the regular camera off and turn the camera that you want on. And then when you start the game, make sure that all of the other cutscene cameras are off. That way will maintain only one camera on at a time, and that should make the whole system very easy to manage at that point. Now, this all is essentially what do we want to have happen when we walk into these rooms, right? So what would be another thing we might want to have happen when we walk into this room? What do you think, Brandon? It's kind of dark in there.
Yes, maybe turn on the light.
Yeah, exactly. Turn on a light. So we need a light first. So I'm going to go ahead and make a yeah, I'll do a point light. And let's grab this point light. And I'll move it over to this first room. There we go. And I'm just going to make it a child of not the collider, but the cutscene manager organizer. And then if I reset it, it moves it. Oops, I want to reset the light. There we go. It moves it to where that would go. Now I can make the range of this light perhaps a little bit less for just the room. I can make sure that the light itself isn't, like in the ceiling, because that's not going to work. We just want it there. And we want it to be casting shadows. Okay. And the intensity of this light we could adjust. And now this can be managed from our collider. And we just need another on-off sequence here. And so we'll take the point light and we'll turn that on. And we'll take the point light and we'll turn that off. And just like the camera, we probably want the point light to be off by default. And so now let's walk over there. There we go. Light turns on. And I'm able to see what I'm doing. And I have shadows. Okay, this is students, I think it takes a little while to develop an eye for this. The lights without the shadows just don't look great, right? So you really want to make sure you have shadowing in most instances, right? And so this is a dynamic light that turns on and off. We definitely want to have shadows for our object there, right? So, and again, you need to opt into that in this instance. Yeah, maybe a little bit, that's a little bit more realistic there. Just changing the range. Yeah, so sort of a larger range with a lower intensity, I think looks much more nuanced now. Now I'm not, getting that super hard light on this and that over there. There's the one choice you can make here is hard shadows versus soft shadows. If we go to soft shadows, do I even see a difference? Strength, airplane. I think the hard shadows are going to be certainly faster. It may not be updating this. Not everything can be updated in play mode because there's some additional things that need to be allocated if you're going to change it to a soft shadow. You can also dial in the shadow strength here. Cool. All right, so now we have things happening when we come into the room there, which is great. Right, another reason that all these scripts use Unity events is that you can hook them up to absolutely anything that way. Cool. All right, so we made a cut scene there. That's good. Anything else about the cameras? Yeah, let's go back to the Cinemachine brain. Or let's go back to the player follow camera. And down here at the bottom, we have adding new components, which we've, you guys know about that. That's where you add your scripts. There's different Cinemachine extensions, and that's right above this here. If we click on this, there's a bunch of things. I think the only one we want to talk about right now is going to be the Deoccluder. Let's take a look at that, which is, again, a choice whether or not you want to add to the game. If we put that on here, collide against default, transparent layers. Okay, I put that on, and now let's see how this works. If I were to there you go. So with the Deoccluder on, now if something gets in between me and not between me, between the camera and the character, the camera will move to go around that obstacle, right? The thing that is occluding, that's why it's called the Deoccluder. I don't know if that's a word, but anyways, the thing that is occluding the camera view, and then it snaps back. There are some options here, just like everything else. So smoothing time, I find this kind of jarring. Adding some smoothing time, and it's not doing it at all there. What do we need? We need okay, that's not changing the that's just changing the amount of time it takes for it to happen. The damping here is similar to the damping. So I believe if I turn this up, we'll see it. Now, when I'm out of there, it snaps to it in order to avoid being blocked, but then smoothly animates back once I'm de-occluded. The initial part of it would be this damping when occluded, and so if I turn that up, now it does this, which is probably not great. I mean, there's a lot of weird camera movement there. So I like the default there, I guess, where damping when occluded goes to 0, so that now we're just not have our view blocked, but turning up some damping for when you get occluded, so that that doesn't happen as a snap. What would happen a lot before would be this, where the camera's just like snapping back and forth all the time when things come in front of it, which I find kind of jarring, especially when you get stuck, like going around a wall or something and it's doing this. And so the defaults here, I think, are successful, where this is okay, but then once we get the camera out from there, it kind of smoothly animates back to where it would go. Yeah, so it's not 100%, especially if you're going to have a lot of interior geometry like this. Then the camera movement there while you're in the room, you can see it got kind of weird there for a second. But yeah, having this lockdown view while I'm in the room. Now, we just used a static camera to switch to for our cutscenes. It doesn't have to be a static camera. It could be a player follow camera with different settings, right? So I have a feeling Logan's going to be interested in this one, but other people as well. Let's say we're going to have a really intense part of our game where there's going to be some rumbling and some earthquaking. Let's do that. So I'll take the same system here. We'll take this one. And we'll say that when we walk over here, it triggers some sort of earthquake-ish scenario. I'll go ahead and Control-C, Control-V this. And this is Cutscene Manager 2. I'll bring it over to here. Again, I could be changing the values for all of this in terms of how big the collider is at any point. But instead of switching to just a static camera here, like so, I am going to switch to a different follow cam with a lot more camera shake to it. So I'll take the camera, I'll delete this. Let me put this at the bottom to keep from getting confused. There we go. So this camera is out. Let's delete that. And this camera here, I am going to Control-C, Control-V, and drag it underneath Cutscene Manager 2. There we go. And now this one, by copy and pasting, it has all of the values I'm using for my standard follow cam. And the only thing I want to do here is make this one a little bit more crazy with, you know, some camera shake. And so I'll turn up the frequency and the amplitude under the noise here. And so this is player follow camera 1. And so if we look at this, we want to take player follow camera 1, and that's the thing that we're going to be turning on. It didn't update the function here, so let's say yes, we want to game object set active. Why is it not like me doing that? Game object set active. There we go. I don't know why it didn't like that. Come back here. Just pick some other function and then go back to set active, and that works. Okay, and so now I'm going to rename this so that it's more descriptive. And so this will be shake, so that's clear. And so we clearly want shake to be off at the beginning. And then when we enter this earthquake zone over here, shake will turn on, and the other camera, our regular camera, will turn off. So let's get that right. We want shake on, and then regular camera off, and then regular camera on, shake off. Right? So when I walk into this section, this is like the earthquake zone. And if I turn this on, save it, let's test that out. Let's look over here. There we go. Okay, that's it worked, and now like it's shaking. It's not really dramatic enough. Let's get the values that make it look a little bit more exciting. So we come back here to the noise. Not there. Noise here. Amplitude and frequency. There we go. That's an earthquake, right? So what's going on? Get me out of here. Oh, okay. That's better. That's better. Jeez. All right. Well, I'm not going to go back there. Oh my God. Camera shake again. What's going on? Let me get out of here. And now back to normal. And let's look at those values. It was gain at 7, frequency at 4. So put those back over here. Cool. Okay. Anything else with cutscene stuff? No, I think we're good. Okay, great. Let's look at, we did that fog or dust over here. Turn that off. The environment here has, this is the light probe thing. This is just the gray box. With the here, let's take this other room and we'll make it lit by the torches. And over here, I've got my torch. Didn't I make this into a prefab? I did. Perfect. So we'll just move this one over here, like so. And we'll double check this particle system. The torch, simple fire, there we go. Remember, the thing that's actually making the light here is the light component in the particle system over here, which we've set to some sort of reasonable settings. 0.02 means that only like 20% of the particles make a light, because that would be way more. And so now, if we turn the particle system on and off, that's going to be really inelegant, where it's just blips off, which was fine for the light. There's different ways we could do it to animate the light. I mean, you could just animate the light intensity on, and then instead of turning on the light, you could just play the animation. Or for the particle system here, we should be able to set our rate. And so this is room 1 here. And let's manage this. And so in our collider here, when we come in, no, this is the first room. Okay. In our collider here, we are going to need another event here, because we want to turn on this torch. And so here, we're going to want to essentially turn on the fire particle system. And so I'll come to the collider here, I'll get simple fire, and drag that over to here. If I come over to the particle system, instead of just turning it on and off, to get more of a smooth, elegant transition, we're going to try play and stop. So and then add another one on the end. I am just going to turn the smoke off for right now. Maybe we don't need it in this one. And so here, again, not set active, we're going to go to particle system, stop. Let's see if we can use the functions, which are start and stop. Or play and stop rather. Notice they don't have any parameters because they're just functions. I noticed there was a separate one with a Boolean value. Let's try these first. And then this one, we don't want the fire to be, we want the fire to happen when we walk into the room. And so, we want to take play on awake and say no, so that this one is not playing when it starts. We don't want to disable it. We just want it to be not playing. I think that will work. Let's see. All right, so now we're connecting our cutscene to a particle system. Let's walk over there. There's the torch. Notice the torch is not making any light. And if we walk into our cutscene room, there we go. It plays. And if we leave, it stops. But all the particles don't blip out of existence immediately. You notice that it kind of like, it's as if someone put the fire out. Right? The particles that were there kind of still are alive. They just go away. It stops making more particles. It'd be good to have a better, smoother on. Ramp that up, but we'll take that for now. Yeah, that works. So we could similarly do something with this stuff over here. So for our crazy cam, right, that's what we're gonna, this one here just came up with that name. We'll do it this way, crazy cam. We got the earthquake camera, but what if we had some crazy fog or dust happening there? So let's come over to our dust smoke, which I had turned off earlier. I had changed it to the lit version. I'm going to change it back to the unlit version. And probably doesn't need to be quite this intense. Turn this down. It is kind of blipping in and out. Why is it doing that? It should have a fade in here. Did I change something about this? It does fade in and fade out. I don't think we're reaching our max particles. Everything else looks good. Texture sheet animation, 8x8. Did I do anything weird here? I don't think so. All right. I'm not going to worry about it right now. Let's just turn it on and off with everything else that's going on. So I want to sort of confine it to this zone. So I'll take the fog or dust here, and then I'll go to the shape and maybe downsize this. And 10 or 555. There we go. 5, 5, 5. And move this over, kind of to where it goes there. Turn down the particle size perhaps a little bit. And we'll do the same thing here with this. So I'll take this effect and make it a child of the cutscene 2, and that'll make it easy to grab it up here and say reset, which will move it to that zone so that that starts happening as soon as we're in there, and we want to turn that on. So again, we want the play on awake off, and then under our room collider here, we'll turn it on. So we'll take the fogger dust over here, fogger dust, and we'll go with the particle system play, and then particle system stop. So the crazy cam and the particle system turn on at the same time, and let's give it a shot. Let's open up our view over here. All right, I'm just walking around minding my own business, and then I walk over here. And the particle system turns on. Doesn't feel like the level of crazy I need. And let's rate over time, turning that up. What does it look like at 50? There we go. So now, what is going on? And if I walk out of there, that should all just sort of die down. If I walk back in there, cool, excellent. Great. Couple other things here. All right, we've got a lot of tools there for changing the view, triggering things on a cutscene, turning things on and off, all that sort of stuff. What was the other thing I spawned here? I had the spawn point. So these physics obstacles we made when I lectured all about the spawn scripts before, right? Different from particles in that these are going to be physically interactive. And so let's say that these were part of that system. And so when we walk into Crazy Town, things start just flying around and falling on us. So over here, we've got the spawner, and I'm going to move that over here, and the spawn, yeah, we had the two different glowing spheres here, and then we had the whether or not we're using the spawn points, all that kind of thing. Where's the main, yeah, interval? I'm going to turn that down so we get more things happening. And we want to have this turn on when we go into Crazy Town. So I'll put, just for the sake of organization, I'll put it down here in that. Go to the collider, and just give myself another system here. Now this one, I think we do want to just turn the object on or off. So I'll take the spawner and throw it in there. And this one, game object on, and then game object off. There we go. And of course we want this off by default. And let's try that. Where's our stuff? Did I just not move the spawner? Let's look here. It's spawning stuff. It's way over there. I just didn't reset its position. There's spawner. Oh, is it using the spawn points that I was using before? Yes, and so I can say, hey, don't use the spawn points. I want you to spawn from the position that I gave you. I just sort of had that in there because I was demoing all this other stuff. So I just want it to be happening here. And we'll make it happen faster. There we go. There we go. So now we've created some real excitement here. There's stuff falling on us. The fog is happening. The camera is shaking like crazy. We got to get out of there. Boom. Cool. Okay, great. That looks good. We went over glowing, right, with our global volume. If I turn this back on. If I turn that on, the object should be glowing. Let's just double check that. I had it off. Yeah, so now we see the clear Tron glow on these objects as they're being spawned into the scene. We've got a real obstacle we need to get out of. There we go. Okay, yeah, that's good. We don't need to get into making a separate volume there. We'll leave that as is for now. We've got our character in there. We've got cutscene stuff managed. We've made some particles. We've got sound in there. We've got sound. We know how to do sound effects. We know how to put the music in the background. We know how to start and stop the music. We've got the other thing. Did I talk about the door script? Outside, like I made a simpler one. I thought I talked about that. Maybe I did or did not. Do you guys particularly remember the door trigger?
I don't know.
I don't think so. So we did the doors using the enter and exit previously, right? So I made a simpler system with the door trigger. Let me show you that. So we need a door that's going to work here. We'll build a door over here. So just have a cube. You're going to have a bespoke mesh, not the cube, because we don't want to have any default objects or starter objects in there when we're doing this, but you're going to have your actual objects. We got a door here. Okay, and then this is going to be the door, and we're going to need a collider. And so I'll grab this and I'll make, let's get a parent object here. So plus, and create empty parent. There we go. And this will be door manager. And let's throw this door script on there. And we need to tell it what is the thing that is the actual door, right? Because I'm up here, I did not put the door script on here. I did not put it here. I put it here. So that this can control this. This is the door. What do we want to trigger the door? The player, clearly. We need a trigger. And so let's do this. This is going to need, by default it's in the middle. If I grab this and move it, it moves the whole thing. That's not what I want. And so we might need to adjust this here so that it doesn't go down to the child objects. And adjust the scale a little bit in terms of how big the trigger space is for the door. That's good. It needs to be a trigger, as always. And I think that's good for now. Let's test it out. Instead of walking over to all this stuff every time testing, you can also shorten your test time substantially by just moving the player. So you don't have to play through the game every time you're testing something. There we go. Wonderful, right? So we have a single trigger. When we go into it, it raises the door up. When we walk out of it, the door closes. So it handles both directions. It has a cooldown time, so you can't sort of like re-trigger it rapidly, which is useful. You see the camera shifting when I'm in here. This is really nice. Look at this. We get the light on our character. So we're walking around in our room. We can leave the room now. The main things to take into account here with the door are, right, so this is way simpler, right? We were going to do enough work with the events, triggering all of our other things that using a bunch of different scripts for the door seem to get kind of cumbersome, and this allows us to manage this much more easily, right? So this is the structure. We've got the door manager that has the door trigger, and it has to have its own trigger, probably a box collider that is set to trigger, otherwise it won't work. What's actually animating the door is all of this business right here, right? So open height, how long it takes to animate, And then we have a default animation curve. Okay, so if I change the open height, we'll just go into play mode and I'll adjust some of this stuff. Right, if I go ahead and make this 1, and then come back over here. What was it at? Was that 5 before, wasn't it? I wanted to move further. Let's come back here. I'll move out. I'll say 0.1. Oh, may not work in play mode. Making adjustments in play mode, that is. So let's come over here and adjust it out of play mode. I believe all those values are sent in the start function, which means that if you adjusted it during play mode, none of the new values would get down to where it would go. Right, so now, right, we've got a broken garage door where it won't open the whole way because this is the open height, right? This is how far the door will animate up and down. So depending on how big the door is and your whole environment, all this business, that all matters there. Let's put it back at 4. The move duration is how long it takes to animate. So if I make this smaller, like 0.2, we'll get more of the Star Trek door. So this, what just happened there, that insanity, that was a result of the Deoccluder. I thought there was a cooldown on this now. Ignore tag, transparent, avoid obstacles, distance limit, minimum occlusion time, 0. Let's turn that up a little bit and see if we can avoid that sort of craziness. That sound effect is not in there. I'm just doing that. There we go. Okay, I didn't get all of that weirdness, right? Let's get occluded. There we go. So turning up that default minimum occlusion time, having this be above 0, I think is a good idea. A half second here or so that you don't get it trying, if you're at a point where something's just barely occluding the camera, you don't end up in a situation where you can't tell what's going on. And then the actual animation of the door, how it's moving, is a function of that animation curve. So if we look at that one more time here, if I click here, this is the door curve, which is set to ease in and ease out. I can go ahead and change this to whatever I would want per version, right? So if I wanted it to, go down and back up or kind of sputter like this, then that's the path it would take when it's opening and closing. I still have it set to 0.2 actually, so that's going to be way too fast. Let's make it 2. There we go. And I'll do it again. There we go. Not quite as easy for opening the door. There we go. If your area that you're designing, your game, maybe isn't the tightest run ship, something like this may be an interesting idea to design, where like, no, the doors don't, totally work well, depending on what it is you're building your world out for there. So much simpler than using this and this, especially because it's going to work in both directions fairly easily. Cool. Okay, good. What was the other thing we wanted to do? Oh, particle emission with an object. So the door trigger here, let's say we need a key to open the door, right? Let's do that. A lot of your game plans had things like this in it, right? Where we need keys to open said door. You need to have an obstacle to get to something. Let's make a key real quick. Let's sacrifice the default cube. I don't know why everyone gets so excited about that online.
You gotta press X and delete the cube.
Yeah, I mean, at home I've just reset the defaults. I'm not doing that. I don't know. It's just not that. Anyway, doesn't matter. Let's do a key. Let's look at some reference. So a lot of these can be different patterns, modeling patterns here. So something like this, right? This here, how would you make this? Yes. Yeah, it's like a torus, right? Right out of the box. And then we could use a variety of things, maybe a cylinder and some extrusions from said cylinder to do those different parts. So let's look at that real quick. Some different ways to do it. When you make the torus, remember you have your major and minor radius. The minor radius is the fatness of it. And you also have the number of segments around. And so 48 strikes me as a bunch, maybe a little bit less here. So let's go to something slightly less just to keep it a little bit lighter. But whenever we do rotational segments, my recommendation is always even numbers. There we go. And so let's go 32. That makes the math very easy. And that works for us. And do we have enough rotational segments? Yeah. Remember, it looks like this. How do we, Tristan, how do we get it from not looking like we can see the individual faces? What's that? What? I don't want to see the individual faces. You're right. I want it to be smooth. Yeah. Shade auto smooth or shade smooth. There's a little bit of difference. Shade auto smooth is going to have an angle that you need to dial in. Shade smooth will not have that angle. So in this case, we just want something flat. Let's get a cylinder. Cylinder. I feel like they're getting closer to us over the course of the class. Same thing. This is going to be thinner than this thing, so maybe just 24 segments here. And then let's go ahead and we're going to rotate on the X. RX control gives me exactly 90. Now I can bring this over, scale this up like so. Come over here, look at it from this side, and scale down, like so. There we go. Maybe out a bit, maybe a bit more. Looks about right. Maybe scale it down. I'm coming over here to this view to just press S because I'm in the straight on view. It's not going to scale it in some weird skewed way. So that makes that a little bit easier. There we go. This also needs some shade smoothing here. Now we want this to look a little bit better. Let's look at this. I'm going to tab in and see about extruding the teeth. And so I could make some cuts here. So Control R for my loop cut. And we'll go here. And then Control R and maybe go to about there. And then Control R. And then go to about there. And then Control R. And then go to about there. Like so. That's not bad. Now we want to extrude the teeth out. So how about here? And then select some faces to extrude. Make sure it's symmetrical. I want one more over there. Is that, how many is that? 6, yeah. So it would be an even number. Then if we want to, this is usually we would want to extrude along the normals, but in this case we do want it to go straight out in this direction. So I believe EX gives us the straight extrusion out like this, which is what we would want. And then one of the ways you could use to flatten this out there we go, that's the view I want, would be to scale in this direction with that selected, which would allow you to flatten that like so. And let's do the other one. So over here, grab these. Could have done these at the same time. There we go. All this allows it to be different. Again, not just E, right? Because that's going to give me some weird direction sometimes. I'm going to make sure I constrain it to the X axis and give it a little bit bigger of a tooth. And then 9, 9. And scale this. That got weird. I think I didn't grab it from the correct direction. Okay, we got the basic shape here, but this could be better. Let's scale all of this up just a touch. We're going to do some things with modifiers. So as soon as we start using the modifiers, before you do that, make sure you apply scale in the object so that you don't get weird skewed modifier changes. So Control A, scale, Control A, scale, so that's good. Shading's a little strange here. Using some bevels on these. We have some options in terms of like, do we want to use the bevel modifier or do we want to manually bevel some of these things? The bevel, let's try the bevel modifier first. So if I come in here and bevel, there we go. And we were to look at this, the angle that gets beveled here allows you to control how many things need a bevel. You see, when I push it above 90, nothing gets beveled anymore. It may be easier to see with shade flat on. There we go. And so as I come down here, you'll see it bevel, right? So below 90 there, we start to get the bevel on the inside, and over there and we can adjust the amount of this. I'm holding down Shift, and we can give it a segment or two. That's going to make that look better. We may want some teeth in this, and so let's do that before we add the modifier. I've had you guys add the bool tools already, I believe. Yeah. So teeth here, this is a good use of the bool tool. Shift A, cube. I'm back in object mode, by the way. And so let's make some cutouts for this, kind of like this, kind of like this, and kind of like that. Shift D, X, there we go. Take this one, move it over. Make sure that they're not overlapping, right? You don't want to have things that cut out of the other thing overlap. That's going to be problematic with the bool. So kind of like that. Over here, make this a little bit more. There we go. Kind of like that. Okay, so these are things we're going to subtract to make the teeth. Maybe one more. Shift D. Down here, like so. Okay, so these are things I'm going to want to subtract. I'm going to grab this, this, and this, and this, and Control J to join them into one thing. I'm going to check the scale on this thing and Control A and apply scale. There we go. And then I want to subtract this from this. And so this, Shift this, and then Control minus subtracts it. And so now I get some teeth on this. And I suppose if I didn't need to Control J, I could move them individually, but the cuts are down here now. So if you grab this and move it, you can see how it affects where things would get cut out. Now, the reason I did this before here is that now we have these hard edges, which we would also want to be beveled in this instance. And so I'm going to not have it eat into the circular part because that's going to create some problematic geometry. That looks fine for the key. Let's come back up to the cylinder itself under modifiers and turn the bevel back on. The Boolean is after the bevel. So alert, this is not what we want, right? We want the Boolean cuts, which are this part here, to be beveled. If I were to turn the bevel back on, you see that we just get this, where this is beveled and this is beveled, but this is not. Whereas this is a 90-degree edge, which we would also want to be beveled. By changing the order here, the order in the modifier stack matters. If I take the bevel and move it up in the stack, now the ones down here get beveled. We get some problematic moves there. We may need to come in and change our bevel size to make this work. So make it a little bit smaller so we get a better bevel here, 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 but not so large that it's going to create a weird problem over there. If I turn the shade smooth back on, that's kind of it, but it will be better results if we come over here and go to the bevel, shading, harden normals. Watch this. Off, on, off, on, off, on. This helps a lot in terms of making this, get these edges here which catch light, but not so much that they're destroying the shading of the rest of the shape, where it's just kind of weird. Here it is without, with. Okay, that's much better. This is not beveled here because we did not join these two objects. We're going to leave that as is for now. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. Let's see. I think we've represented the idea of key in the game. Yeah? This certainly communicates key, right? So let's go ahead and export this. If I just grab the, let's see. We have the torus and the cylinder. If I grab this one and this one, and I Control J, there we go. That brings them together. Did that automatically apply the modifiers? No, it didn't. But I think they'll be applied when we send this out. And so this will be the key. And at this point, I might apply these modifiers. And this could use a quick UV unwrap. In this case, I'll grab everything and hit U, and let's do Smart UV Project and unwrap. And for an object like this, it's going to kind of do this cubic projection, which will take it over to Substance Painter and work with that over there. I mean, the part that would take the most time under the UV unwrapping is this stuff over here. Maybe we just use the Smart UV Project on that stuff. So we did that stuff there. What about the rest of it? We could do that. So here, you know, Alt-click, there we go. And then, well, let's set the seams first. So for instance, on this one, let's come in here and set a seam here. Like so. Right-click, mark seam. And then here in the key itself, let's grab that one and say mark seam, and it would need another seam happening this way. There we go. And so now if I were to grab these polygons or faces, Control L, grab this over here. I'm not going to use Control L, but I'll just use Shift, Alt, Shift click to grab this stuff. I think that's everything I would want. So now I could keep the unwrapping I already have on this part, which is a little less fun, and then unwrap these. So you just not smart unwrap, but just unwrap. And it gives me a much cleaner unwrap for the rest of it. If I go A and grab all of it, you see that the other unwrap is still valid for these parts. And so now, in order to get all of this stuff together, because we don't want it to be overlapping, we can do our grab everything and average island size, and then pack. I'm going to say maybe pack without rotation, making this sideways a little weird. let's say pack, don't rotate. Actually, we need to step back before we pack the first time. There we go. And now we'll say pack, don't rotate. That's a little better. That works. Let's export this file. Actually, let's unfold. It still has the cube down here. This was the Boolean extensions or subtractions. We don't need any of that stuff. We don't want that coming along for the ride. And so we just want this. So let's do this. We'll take our key and we will export this file, export FBX. Let's paint it. Don't auto unwrap. Looks good. Let's see what's in the community, maybe to use as a starting point. I'm going to go down to smart materials. Actually, if I just look, well, no, if I come down, yeah, smart materials, metal. I like this. I don't know why it's not loading the other stuff. And so if I were to bring those in, they go to the other folder. So these need to go, if you just drag them in, it'll say smart material. Yeah. So let's see what these look like. Doesn't look, not so smart, right? Because we haven't baked the mesh maps. We need to do that. Bake mesh maps. And we can say bake. That way we'll know where the inner parts are of the mesh. There we go. Return to painting. Now, see, we get much more interesting results. The mesh is affecting the actual paint. There we go. I like that, but maybe not quite so dark in the dark parts. And so like the dirt here, if I were to rotate this around, maybe a little bit less dirt, right? The main thing you could do is just under the dirt base layer, sort of dial in more or less of that. Also under the mask, you'll see that it's probably a mask editor and a generator. What is the generator? Generator is empty. This doesn't need to be there. Mask editor. And so the global balance, you can see how much of that you want to have in the key. And let's say you didn't want any damage. You can just sort of opt in and out of the different parts of the smart material. So again, the principle of don't accept the default. Make your own decisions, right? Using the community assets is a huge time saver, which is necessary at the scale that we're working. You're one student making an entire video game in the last 2 weeks of the semester. So you need to use your smarts to apply your artistic decision making and energy where it will be very significant. So that looks good. Let's export this. Export textures. Let's make a folder. Let's, the substance package is already installed in the template I gave you. So we can export this, we should be able to export this as an SBSAR, assuming there's no issues like whatever was happening to Logan. But yep, so we have SBSAR and then output template, choose the appropriate, choose wisely. Unity, Universal Render Pipeline Metallic Standard. And we will save. And we will bring in our key. Let's do it. So now, over here, let's bring in the key mesh first. There we go. We have the key. And so if I bring in the key, it seems a little big. Is that occluding other lights? I don't know why they got so bright. We'll look here in a second. Anyways, too big, right? So key asset and size it down. So key model scale factor, probably like 0.1. Oh, it came in with the camera and a light. That's why it has a light there, because I didn't check the select only selected box. There it is. Okay. And that updates the prefab. And so I want to go over to overrides and say apply, which is grayed out. I'm not going to worry about that right now. Okay. Let's bring in the SBSAR under I put it in this folder here. Should have gone in that folder. What happened there? Did it not do it? File, export textures. Yeah, that's where it's going. That's where it's going. Maybe I just didn't click export. Nope, it doesn't want to generate the textures. It says export finished, and then down here it says can't do it. Did anything show up in the folder? Yeah, it's right there. Okay. And if we bring this in, Oh, the SBS AR is not generating the material. These kind of things are always like this, especially when Adobe gets involved. Any sort of thing they're trying to do to save you work just always ends up being maybe not so great. So we'll do it the hard way. We'll just get textures. So we'll say PNG. Delete this. Make a new folder for the material. This will be key material. And we'll bring in our textures. Make a new material. And this should be able to go in there. This should be able to go in here. This should be able to go in here. And this should be able to go on here. Cool. So we got our key. And this is something we need to open the door. Right? So how do we make this something that we need to open the door? The key itself needs a collider. In this case, a box collider will do. With a trigger on it. You might want to fit the size of the key a little bit better. And we want this to unlock the door. So we need the on trigger enter. And when the player enters, what do we want to do? First of all, the door itself has a box for, is it locked? And so if we want the key to open it, it needs to start locked. Then the key itself here, when it's picked up by the player, what do we want to have happen? We want the key itself to go away. And so we'll say key turn off. There we go. And then we also want to unlock the door. And so we want to grab the door manager. And we want to go down to door trigger. And we should have a function for unlock door. And I would switch the order of these. So unlock the door, then get rid of the key. And so there we go. There's my key. Like so, right there. And so let's test this out. Okay, if I go up to the door, nope. Nope, can't get in. Ah, I get the key. Boom. And now the door should be unlocked. And I can enter. Now I'm in my cutscene, and now I can get out. All right, we did the whole thing there. On the door, one last thing. We can indicate, how does the player know it's locked or not? Well, it can just not open. That's one thing. Or we can give it a little bit more of a hint. So for instance, we have a object up here, like so. And we'll put the red light on it. And now, under the door, what is the lock light? It is this sphere, which I will change to lock door light. And on the door, I might make this a child of the door manager. On the door manager, this needs to be over here. And then the locked material should be glow red. And then we can change the color when we unlock, which I'll just change to glow blue right now, but you could make it anything. And so now we should see a change on the door light when we grab the key. So it's red. And if I were to grab the key, and I'm trying to position it so we can see this happen. Boom. Ah, okay, well maybe that door's open now. And now I can walk in the door. Cool. All right. With all of those things, that's a lot of different techniques to use to integrate into the wide variety of sort of play mechanics that people were talking about in their different game design documents. And so now you're at the stage where there's a lot of work to be done here. You've got your character in there. You've got to get your basic things modeled and lay out your game world. Then use your particles and events to bring that to life, along with the events to implement the game mechanics. Sound good? Okay. All right, there's a lot there. Let me get this up online so you can see it. Sound good? I didn't fix that normal map. That's why that looked weird previously. Okay. All right. Yes?
Actually, quick question. So, what would happen if the camera were in the room? Would the door? So if it were like a closed room, and the camera weren't in the room, like what would you have to do if it was a closed room? Would you just have to put the camera in there?
To see the character in the room?
Yeah. So like, would you have to put it inside the room if it were just a closed off room?
Just to see the character at all?
Yeah.
If you don't want to do anything specific with the camera view, just adding the Deoccluder would make the camera snap closer so that you could see the character while you're in the room. So that would be the primary, that would be the easiest way to make sure that no matter where your character went, you're going to be able to see the character. The cameras that we implemented here and over here were more for artistic effect, if we wanted to look at the character in this direction. We didn't put that camera over there because that's the only way we were going to be able to see the character in the room. If I were to go over to the other side where there's rooms without the cameras in them, let's walk over here. Okay, let's get out of there. Right, so if I walk into this, right, even here, if I start to walk into like this tiny tube here, right, because I have the Deoccluder on there, the camera does get closer so that I can see what's going on when I'm in these tiny spaces, even without the cutscene cameras.
Okay, perfect. Awesome.
And again, that was, if something gets in the way of the camera, it is occluding the view of the camera. The Deoccluder, which again, I'm not 100% sure is a word, and this is not, it is not a component. It is a Cinemachine. What is the vocabulary there? Cinemachine extension. The same kind of thing. It's a thing you're adding to a thing to make it work differently, but it's not, you're not going to find it if you look here under Add Component. It's at the bottom of the Cinemachine list after Noise under Extensions, Add Extension, and it's in there under Cinemachine Deoccluder, right? Because these are not components. You can't add them to like a game, some random game object, because it's not in the Cinemachine system. Make sense? Okay. Cool. Great. Awesome. Everybody have a great Thanksgiving.